Negotiators from Hamas, Qatar and the US have been holding talks aimed at securing a truce in the 5-month war in Gaza. US officials have said Israel has broadly approved a deal, but sticking points have emerged on both sides. These include details of hostages held by Hamas and the number of Palestinian prisoners Israel might be willing to release. The Times of Israel reports that Israel is not willing to join the talks without a list of hostages who are still alive. For the moment, there's no let-up in the fighting. Israel has stepped up operations in the southern Gaza city of Khan Younis. The army says it has destroyed dozens more Hamas targets. Pressure for a truce is mounting as the United Nations warns of a looming famine in Gaza. The territory is run by Hamas, which carried out the October 7th terror attacks. The US Vice President Kamala Harris has called for a ceasefire in Gaza and has urged Israel to allow Gaza aid. Her comments were among the sharpest yet by senior US leadership.
And given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire. For at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table. This will get the hostages out and get a significant amount of aid in.
Well, for more now, we can speak to Giorgio Cafiero. He's a Middle East analyst and the CEO of Gulf State Analytics in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us here on DW. We just heard Kamala Harris call for an immediate ceasefire, using really some of the strongest language we've heard so far from the US. Do you think this is Washington trying to distance itself from Israeli leadership?
Well, it's a good question, and I think it's important to realize that, of course, U.S. domestic politics are in play. Many of the sort of base voters, if you will, in the Democratic Party are very upset at the Biden administration for being so incredibly supportive of Israel's war on Gaza over these past few months. And the Biden team certainly does not want more progressive voters sitting at home in November. In terms of the U.S.-Israel relationship, though, I mean, what we've seen over these past few months is that the Biden administration is always voicing its opinion, explaining what it prefers, telling Israel what it would like to see happen. But we never have seen the Biden administration, actually condition aid to Israel, set any red lines or ultimatums. And without any of that, I'm always skeptical that this rhetoric and these statements really have anything to do with the Biden administration's actual policies that have some real substance to them.
Okay. And looking at the region itself, what kind of ceasefire deal do you expect, if any, in the coming hours or days?
Well, there obviously is this talk right now about an arrangement that the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar have been working to secure, whereby we'd have a ceasefire for 6 weeks. There would be a swap of captives and prisoners, some humanitarian aid let in. It seems, though, that Hamas is sort of setting as a condition not just a ceasefire that might last for 6 weeks, but rather a permanent end to the war. There's also demands Hamas is making about letting Palestinians return to northern Gaza and expulsion of the departure of the Israeli occupying forces on the ground in the besieged enclave. So whether or not the negotiators from Doha, Cairo, and Washington are going to be able to bridge the gaps, I don't know. It's going to certainly require quite a bit more work. I think really seeing is believing, and I'm not so convinced that there's going to be some sort of an arrangement that the two sides are going to agree to. I certainly hope that's the case, but again, seeing is believing.
And so it clearly seems like there are so many sticking points here. And while these truce talks happen, the Israeli army is stepping up attacks in southern Gaza. So with all that in mind, do you see any chance of Israel agreeing to a long-term ceasefire?
I think we're going to get to that point. Often left out of these discussions is the fact that continuation of this war imposes a huge cost on the Israeli economy. There's also domestic politics in Israel. We're talking, about the influence, the role of the families of the hostages who have been held by Hamas in Gaza for a number of months. So obviously this conflict, this war cannot continue forever. There's going to come a point when the dust eventually settles in Gaza. But I think it's very possible that the Netanyahu government is going to continue raging this war for a longer period of time, unfortunately.
Middle East analyst Giorgio Cafiero in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
It's a pleasure.